So it's been a little while since I've done a deck tech, but I've got a new one for you today. This is a new commander from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. This is Hinata Dawn Crowned. I was pretty excited to make this deck, and I've played it a few times by this point, and I gotta say it's a lot of fun. I like this deck a lot. So let's take a look at the card. It costs 4 mana in total. It has a Jeskai color identity, so blue, red, and white. It's a 4/4 Kieran Spirit, has flying and trample. That's all cool, but now let's get to the part that we really care about. Spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each target. So that provides so much potential, because thinking about it at just the very basic level, let's say you cast something like Negate. That targets something, right? So that means it costs 1 less, so now your Negate only costs a blue, which is really good, right? But now let's think of it on a bigger scale. There are a lot of big instants and sorceries that can target multiple things. Something like, say, Comet Storm or Crackle with Power. So those cards, they can target any number of things, right? So this makes it cost 1 less for each target, so you can get a massive discount on those spells. So the idea with this deck is to take advantage of this ability and make it much easier to cast big spells like this. Typically with the Jeskai colored commander, you'll see that it kind of has like a spell slinger type of theme to it. And that's kind of what this is, but it's not so much about casting a whole bunch of spells, it's about casting, 1 or 2 really big spells. There is another ability here though. It says spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast for each target. So that's really cool too, because this has kind of built-in protection to it. And this also is a little bit more interesting than it might seem at first, because it's not just spells they cast that target your things, it's just spells they cast in general, right? So say they try to put an aura on their creature, well, that aura is going to cost 1 more now. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that for both of these abilities here, they only count for when spells are cast, not for when something is targeted in general. So say, for example, if there's a creature in play, and that creature wants to use its ability to target something, then neither of these abilities will matter because that's not a spell being cast, right? So let's start off with the creatures now. There are not very many creatures in this deck, including the commander. I believe there are 15 creatures, possibly 14, we'll see in a second. But like I said, this is about casting a few really big spells, so we're not really so dependent on creatures, we just really want to take advantage of this ability here. Do have a few though, so starting off with Esper Sentinel, just a great value card in white, right? It's a great way to start drawing cards really early on just a 1-drop. I feel like this is a kind of a white staple at this point, so we're playing it in this deck. Got a couple of creatures here that are pretty similar to discount our spells even further, both Goblin Electromancer and Baral, Chief of Compliance. I always like to think of this guy as Baral, Chief of Complaints, because he discounts your spells and gives you a bonus for when you counter things. But these are both just in here to discount our spells some more. Here's a cool one that I feel like is really underrated. I think this card is super good, and honestly I play it in I believe every commander deck that plays blue. Thieving Skydiver. It's a 2/1 flyer for 2, but it has this kicker ability. So when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, gain control of an artifact with converted mana cost X or less. If that artifact is an equipment, attach it to Thieving Skydiver. So basically this is like a Soul Ring stealer, right? So you pay the 2 mana, you pay 1 for the kicker, so 3 mana total. It comes into play and you steal your opponent's Soul Ring. Seems so good to me. I'm surprised that this card isn't, more expensive than it is right now. Here's a new card that I'm a big fan of, the Reality Chip. This is another blue card where I believe I'm playing it in all of my blue decks that I have also, but it's almost like a 3 mana Future Sight. If you don't know what Future Sight does, it's basically just this ability. You can play cards from the top of your library. But anyway, it's a 0/4 for 2. You can look at the top card of your library anytime, which is actually quite good to just pay 2 mana and have that ability. It gives you a lot of information. You can set up your turns a lot better. But also, you can reconfigure for 3 mana, so you can basically use this as an equipment, attach it to a creature, or unattach it. And as long as this is attached to a creature, you can play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. So you can just kind of go off with this, and the top of your library is basically your hand now, right? we've got this Soulfire Grandmaster. This card is really cool in this deck. What it does is, so it's a 2/2 lifelink for 2, but the important ability, actually there's two important abilities here. First one is instant and sorcery spells you control have lifelink. So with Hinata here, we're casting some really big spells. One that I mentioned earlier was Crackle with Power. I've cast that card already and done, I believe, about 100 damage with it. So if I had this in play, I would gain 100 life, because that spell would have lifelink. Then it has this other ability. You can pay 4 mana total. Next time you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand this turn, put that card in your hand as it resolves instead of into your graveyard. So that's actually pretty relevant too, because, you know, this is all about casting big spells. So if we have some extra mana, we can just kind of rebuy those spells, right? Here's another creature that rewards us for playing spells. I always think of these creatures together. I believe they're from the same set, and they're both mythics, and they're both, you know, Jeskai themed. But I don't know, it's just weird. Whenever I think of one, I think of the other two. But we're playing both of these. Monastery Mentor. This is a 2/2 for 3 with Prowess. So Prowess is whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +1/+1 till end of turn. Also, though, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you create a 1/1 Monk with Prowess. So this would work better in a Spellslinger deck where you're casting a whole bunch of spells, but it's still good enough to put in this deck also, I think. Because, you know, even if we make, say, like 3 creatures from this, that's still pretty good, I feel. Here's one that I feel works pretty well in this deck. Mavinda, Student's Advocate. This is a 3-drop, 2/3. This is kind of a cool commander on its own, but it works well in this deck. So it's a 2/3 flyer, but it has this ability. You can pay 0, and you can cast an instant or sorcery from your graveyard this turn. If the spell doesn't target a creature you control, it costs 8 more to cast this way. And then if that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead, activate only once each turn. So we have a lot of spells, like I said, that can target multiple things. So even if it's a spell that we don't really want to target our own thing with, like say a Comet Storm or something, we could still just, you know, make the number we're paying into X just enough so that it does what we want, but it does not kill our creature. So that would allow us to cast it using a Mavinda's ability without having to pay 8 more. But even if we do have to pay 8 more, a lot of the times Hinata will discount it so much that the 8 is actually, you know, not so bad of a cost to pay. Here's another creature that's kind of a cool commander on its own, but it also works quite well in this deck, Feather the Redeemed. So this is a 3/4 flyer for 3, but it has this ability that works quite well with Hinata. It says each time you cast an instant or sorcery, if it targets a creature you control, exile that card instead of putting it into your graveyard, and then return that card to your hand at the end of the turn. So this is another one where if we have a spell that can target a whole bunch of different things, we could just target one of our creatures with it and get that spell back at the end of the turn. Actually, one cool thing that I did with this already was I have Curse of the Swine in this deck, and my Hinata was in play with Darksteel Mutation on it. So it was, you know, kind of just a useless creature at that point. But I had Feather in play also, so I targeted Hinata as well as my opponent's creatures with Curse of the Swine, and since Feather was in play and I targeted my creature, I got my Curse of the Swine back at the end of the turn, so that was kind of cool. Next up, we've got this Archmage Emeritus. This is just a way to get some card draw going. Nice and simple. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, draw a card. So that works quite well in a deck that's all about casting instants and sorceries. There's a Stormkiln Artist. This is a little bit similar in that it, rewards us for playing instants and sorceries. However, this rewards us in the form of treasure tokens instead of drawing cards. It's also very similar to Pitiless Plunderer. It's also, a 2/2 for 4 that gives us treasures, but this card is very good, and it can provide you with a lot of ramp. Now all the way up at 6 mana, we've got the Locust God here. This is in here basically just as kind of like a good stuff card. So it's a 4/4 flying for 6. Whenever you draw a card, you make a 1/1 blue and red insect token with flying, and it has haste. Also, you can pay 4 mana, draw, discard a card, and then when this dies, return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So this doesn't really fit with the theme of with Hinata of casting spells and targeting lots of things, but it's just a really good blue-red creature, so I feel like it's just worth playing as just a good card, right? It provides us with creature tokens, it can help us draw some cards, just does a lot of good stuff on its own. Then way up on the top end, at 7 mana, we've got Hullbreaker Horror. This one also rewards us for playing spells, so 7/8 for 7 with Flash. This can't be countered. Whenever you cast a spell, choose up to 1. Return a spell you don't control to its owner's hand, or return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So this card is super powerful, and 7 mana is a lot, but it's definitely worth playing this, and I feel like this is a pretty good inclusion in this deck. And that's it for the creatures, actually. So just 14 creatures, but I feel like the deck really doesn't need that many. I think it works, just fine with only this many here. Next up, though, we've got the really interesting part of the deck, the part that really takes advantage of Hinata's ability. These are the really big spells. So we'll start off with Soulfire Eruption. Costs 9 mana, pretty expensive, right? But let's take a look at it. Choose any number of target creatures, planeswalkers, and or players. For each of them, exile the top card of your library, then Soulfire Eruption deals damage equal to that card's converted mana cost to that permanent or player. You may play the exiled cards until the end of your next turn. So with this basically costs 3 red. 3 red, and you can target any number of things. So you just target all of your opponents and all of your opponent's creatures and planeswalkers, and if you have Hinata out, then the 6 just disappears, basically, because you've targeted so many things that it's been discounted so much that it only costs 3 red. So being able to cast something like this for just 3 red is kind of insane, I feel. Got a Shatter Skull Smashing. This is it's actually pretty good in this deck. I mean, it's played in a lot of decks just because it's one of the flip lands, so you can get some value off of your land. But it is a big X spell, right? So you can discount that a lot with Hinata by targeting several things with X, and get even better use out of this flip land. Crackle with Power. So far, from my experience with this deck, this is kind of the most insane card with Hinata. So let's take a look at this. It costs X, 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 red, red. So that's a lot of X's, right? Pretty simple though. Crackle with Power deals 5 times X damage to each of up to X targets. So normally you would have to pay a ton of mana into X, right? And you do still have to pay quite a bit. But basically, with Hinata, you can essentially just remove one of these X's. That's how that works with Hinata's ability. So for XX red red, you can deal 5 times X damage to each of up to X targets. So say for example, if we have 10 mana in play available to use, so we need to pay 2 for the red, so that leaves us with 8 to spend on X. So we spend 4 twice, being 8, so X equals 4. That means we can do 5 times 4 damage, so 20 damage to each up to 4 targets. So if we have 10 mana and Hinata in play, we can do 80 damage. That's kind of a lot, right? And there's lots of mana rocks and stuff in here, lots of ways to ramp, so you could potentially be playing this for X equals 6 or 7, and at that point you just win the game, right? Because you're dealing like 40 damage to each of your opponents. Here's another pretty similar X spell, Jaya's Immolating Inferno. Pretty popular card at this point, I feel. It deals X damage to each of up to 3 targets. So if you have Hinata in play, this can be discounted by 3. So that's, pretty powerful too, I think. Next, there's this Volcanic Offering. This card is really cool in this deck. So the initial cost is 5, but we're going to discount that by quite a bit with Hinata. So it says, destroy target non-basic land you don't control and target non-basic land of an opponent's choice you don't control. Also, Volcanic Offering deals 7 damage to target creature you don't control and 7 damage to target creature of an opponent's choice you don't control. So this card has 4 targets, 2 lands and 2 creatures, right? So since there are 4 targets, if you have Hinata in play, it costs 4 less. So you can cast this spell at instant speed for just a red mana, do 7 damage to 2 things, and destroy 2 non-basic lands. It's quite a big effect for just 1 mana. There's this Disorder in the Court. This is another instant for X blue and white. It says exile X target creatures, then investigate X times. Return the exile cards to the battlefield tapped under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So with Hinata, basically this just costs blue and white, and you can target every creature in play if you feel. And the main thing that I'm playing this for is just the ability to investigate a whole bunch of times and get a ton of clues so that I can draw some extra cards, but also being able to basically flicker some creatures is pretty powerful too, because if your opponent makes a big attack on you or something, you can just cast this and remove them from combat. If there's any I don't think there are any enter the battlefield triggers that we want to reuse in this deck. Not really. That would be a way to take advantage of this. Not so much in this deck, but if you do play creatures with enter the battlefield abilities, this could let you reuse those abilities as well. Or another use for this card is you can use it to protect your creatures, because you can play it at instant speed, and the creatures, when they're exiled, they don't come back until the end of the turn. So you could actually even use this to protect yourself from, say, like a Cyclonic Rift or something by just exiling all your creatures. Then the Cyclonic Rift will resolve, then at the end of the turn, they're going to come back, right? Here's another big X spell with Aurelia's Fury. Very similar to all of these ones. This one is a little bit different, though. So at instant speed, it costs X red, white. Deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or players. Tap each creature dealt damage this way. Also, though, players dealt damage this way can't cast non-creature spells this turn. So it's kind of a way to, like, somewhat silence your opponents for a turn. So that's kind of cool. And also, you know, since we're playing Hinata, for everything we target, it discounts it. So we can target. This is another spell where it just costs red and white, and we can target any number of things. One thing with this, though, I believe for everything it targets, I think that it has to do at least 1 damage to it. So I don't think that you can just target literally everything and just say you'll do 0 damage to everything and a whole bunch to 1. I don't believe that's the way this card works. Another very similar card here in Comet Storm. So it's another instant speed card. We can cast for X red red. Has multi-kicker, so we can pay 1 any number of times. Choose a target creature or player. That might be any target. I'm not sure if this card is being errated or not. And then choose another target creature or player each time this is being kicked. This does X damage to each of those, so another pretty useful X spell to cast with Hinata. There's this Magma Opus. This card is really cool with this deck, because essentially it just costs a blue and a red. Normally it would cost 8, right? But it'll get discounted from Hinata. So at instant speed, this deals 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of targets. Also tap 2 target permanents and create a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token and draw 2 cards. So just by tapping 2 targets, that's going to discount this by 2, and then 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of targets. If you target 4 different things, that'll discount it by 4 more. So you can potentially cast this for just a blue and a red. There's this card I mentioned earlier, Curse of the Swine. So for X blue blue, exile X target creatures. For each creature exiled this way, its controller puts a 2/2 green boar creature onto the battlefield. So basically for just 2 blue mana, we can target any number of creatures we want, because it costs 1 less for each target. So a very useful card in this deck. Another card here in Ether Gale that ends up costing just blue and blue, returns 6 target non-land permanents to their owner's hands. So it would be discounted by 6. But you know, the minimum we can pay is blue blue, because it only gets discounted by the colorless mana. But it's still quite a good ability to cast for just 2 blue mana. Then there's here Cyclonic Rift. We're playing this because we're playing Commander and we're playing blue, so we're playing Cyclonic Rift. This one actually doesn't really get discounted by Hinata. It does if you pay it if you don't overload it, but you know, 99% of the time you want to overload this, right? There's a couple of cards in here that let us take advantage of Hinata's ability to gain control of opponents' creatures. Here's one of them, Mass Manipulation. Normally would cost a ton of mana, but it's going to be discounted by Hinata. Gain control of X target creatures and or planeswalkers. And then also, a similar one, Blatant Thievery. For each opponent, gain control of target permanent that player controls. So it's going to be discounted by 3 probably if you have 3 opponents. So it would cost blue, blue, blue 1. So for 4 mana, you get to gain control of 3 permanents. This is a pretty good deal, I feel. There's this card here that's pretty similar to Cyclonic Rift. Not exactly, but so for X blue, 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 return X target non-land permanents to their owner's hands. So if you have Hinata in play, it's just blue, 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 return any number of non-land permanents to their owner's hands, which is pretty decent, right? Playing a bit of removal here, we got Farewell. This card is so good. It's another new one from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, but it's a board wipe for basically anything aside from planeswalkers. We've got Jeska's Will. This is another one of these cards where basically if you're playing this color and you're playing Commander, then you want to be playing this card, but it's just such a good card, right? It gives you so much ramp, gives you some card advantage. This is a really cool one. Another new one from Kamigawa. March of Swirling Mist. So for X and a blue, it's an instant. As an additional cost to cast the spell, you can exile any number of blue cards from your hand, and it costs 2 less for each card exiled this way. We don't really care so much about that part of the card with in this deck, because it says up to X target creatures phase out. So with Hinata in play, it's just instant speed for 1 blue, any number of creatures phase out. So you can do a lot of cool stuff with that, right? You can mess around with your opponent's combat, you can use it to protect your creatures. This is a super versatile card in this deck. So here's a card that works really well in this deck. I think this card is really cool. I like making tons of treasure tokens, and with Hinata, this will allow me to do that. So for X and a red, for each of up to X target creatures, create a red aura enchantment token named Smoke Blessing attached to that creature. These tokens have enchant creature, and when an enchanted creature dies, it deals 1 damage to its controller, and you create a treasure token. So with Hinata in play, for just a red, we can put one of those tokens on every creature, and then whenever one of those dies, we get a treasure token. We can do some incidental damage as well. There's this Reality Spasm. It's a very flexible card in this deck. For X blue instant, choose one, tap X target permanents or untap X target permanents. I feel like mainly what you want to do with this card in this deck is use it to ramp you a bunch, because if you have Hinata, for just blue, you can target all of your lands. So like you tap all of your lands, you get mana, and then you target all of them. X costs nothing when you have Hinata in play, so then you get to untap all of your lands, and that can give you a ton of mana in one turn. So we're playing a few counterspells here. All of these will get discounted by Hinata by at least 1, so negate costs only 1. Arcane Denial also costs only 1. Got this Mystic Confluence. This can cost potentially only 2, depending on which modes you choose. Spell Swindle still costs 4, but paying 4 for this effect is, I feel, still worth it. I think Spell Swindle is a pretty sweet card. And then Sublime Epiphany, this can get discounted by a pretty decent amount as well. So potentially 5 counterspells here. And make a little bit of room. Just shift some of this stuff up here. Go like this. So we're playing a few artifact and enchantment removal cards. These can take advantage of Hinata's ability. So by force, destroy X target artifacts. So, with Hinata, it's just red, destroy any number of artifacts. Pretty sweet. Crush Contraband. Choose one or both, exile target artifact or exile target enchantment. So this could be discounted by 2. So for 2 mana, you can exile 2 things, basically. Well, exile an artifact and enchantment if you like, which is pretty good for 2 mana, I feel, at instant speed. Heliod's Intervention works very well in this deck. We can have target player gain twice X life if we want, but that's not really why we're playing this. We're playing it for destroy X target artifacts or enchantments. So, for white, destroy any number of target artifacts or enchantments. It's pretty cool. Generous Gift, removal for anything for just 2 mana when it gets discounted. March of Otherworldly Light. It's similar to this card, right? It has the same kind of discount clause, except for white cards. But anyway, it says exile target artifact, creature, or enchantment with mana value X or less. So it's only going to get discounted by 1 with Hinata, but that's still pretty good, right? Because for just 1 mana at instant speed, we can exile an artifact, creature, or enchantment that costs 1 or less. But this card, I feel like being able to discount it with the ability here is a lot more relevant in this deck than March of Swirling Mist, because probably we never really want to pay that when we have Hinata out, but being able to discount it even more with exiling a white card from our hand, this is, kind of some sneaky removal that the opponent might not see coming for potentially just a white at instant speed. Got a few enchantments in here. Whirlwind of Thought, very simple. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, draw a card. Works pretty well in this deck. Double Vision, 5 mana. Whenever you cast your first instant or sorcery spell each turn, copy that spell. You can choose new targets for the copy. pretty good in this deck, I feel, because we're casting some really big spells, so being able to copy those I feel like is a pretty good effect to have. Then Sunbird's Invocation. It's a pretty popular red card for Commander. Whenever you cast a spell from your hand, reveal the top X card to your library, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. You can cast a card revealed this way with converted mana cost X or less, without paying its mana cost, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. But with Hinata, we're casting some spells where, when it's discounted by so much, the converted mana cost could be, like, pretty ridiculously high, I feel, so it can actually make some pretty good use of Sunbird's Invocation here. And there's just the 3 enchantments. You might think it's kind of weird that I'm playing white and I'm not playing Smothering Tithe. And yeah, that is kind of weird, but the reason for that is just because I only have one of it and it's in another deck. But yeah, if you have Smothering Tithe, definitely I would play it in this deck. And the same goes for Dockside Extortionist. That's the same reason why it's not in this deck. But if you have those, put them in here. So moving on to the artifacts, there is quite a bit of artifact ramp in here because we're not playing greens, so we have to kind of rely on it. And so the deck is powered up a little bit, like it's not a CEDH deck, but we've got some, some powerful cards in here. We got Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Thought Vessel, got a bunch of signets here, Boros Signet, Izzet Signet, Azorius Signet, got a Talisman of Creativity, Chromatic Lantern. I feel like it's worth playing Chromatic Lantern in a 3-color deck because you can get color screwed pretty easily, especially if green is not one of your colors. So I feel like Chromatic Lantern is worth an inclusion in this deck. And then there's this card, Elementalist's Palette. Normally a 3-mana mana rock, it needs to do something pretty useful to warrant paying the extra 3 mana for it. I feel like in this deck, this card works pretty well. I feel like it's worth paying the 1 extra here. So taps for 1 mana of any color. It's pretty good. But it says, whenever you cast a spell with X in its mana cost, put 2 charge counters on this. And then you can tap it to add a colorless for each charge counter on Elementalist Palette. Spend the mana only on costs that contain X. I don't remember the exact number of spells that we have that cost X in here, but I think that it might be upwards of like 17. So with that many, I feel like this card is actually going to be quite good in this deck. So in total, we've got 10 mana rocks here. You could even be playing a Talisman of Conviction too. I wouldn't fault you for putting even more mana rocks in here too. Potentially, I should have that in here myself. This card is not exactly a mana rock, but it does discount our spells, Primal Amulet. So for 4 mana, instants and sorceries we cast cost 1 less to cast. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a charge counter on this, then if there are 4 more charge counters on it, remove those and transform this. Then this card gets really good. Turns into this land that says you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. When that mana is spent to cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy the spell. You can choose new targets for the copy. So, just imagine if you cast Crackle for power for X equals 6, and you use this to pay for one of that, you're going to copy that and probably win the game, I imagine. So this card is, pretty good for this deck. Got just a few equipments here. Sword of the Animist and Sword of Hearth and Home, just to get some ramp going. Like I said, we're not playing green, so we need to rely on artifacts to give us ramp. These are artifacts that give us ramp, but they give it to us in the form of searching out lands, so these I feel are pretty important to have in here. Then Lightning Greaves, because Hinata, like, the deck, it can work without Hinata, because we're playing lots of good cards, but Hinata is kind of a lightning rod, because you can kind of go off and do some really crazy stuff with Hinata, so I feel like the opponents kind of want to remove this as soon as possible when it's in place, so you probably would want to slap a Lightning Greaves on it. So there's this card, which I think is really interesting. This is actually the most recent addition to the deck. I actually put this in the deck literally right before filming this video, so I'll just be honest and say I have not play tested it in this deck yet. The story with that was I was swapping out a card. I was looking for probably I was planning to put in, say, like a Treasure Cruise or a Dig for Time or something, just some card draw. Then I was flipping through my binder and I saw this. I thought, This is actually a really good ability. So I'm not playing this to take advantage of it being a vehicle or to attack with an 8/8. I view this as basically just a 4 mana artifact, which has this ability: 1 tap, draw 2 cards, then discard a card, and you make a 1/1 pilot that can crew vehicles as though it's power 2 or greater, which, could be relevant for crewing this. But this actually seems really good to me as just a blue-white artifact that can do this ability. So pay 1 and tap. You draw 2, then discard 1. Like, think about how popular a card like Phyrexian Arena is. That's only 3 mana. This is 4, so this does cost 1 more. But with Phyrexian Arena, it's just at the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card and lose a life. But with this one, granted, yes, it costs 1 more, and you have to pay 1 for the activated ability, but you draw 2 cards and the discard 1, so that's way better than just drawing a card and losing a life. And then you also get this 1/1 pilot, and you can do that every turn, assuming you can pay the 1 and tap this. I feel like this is actually a really good card just to play as an artifact and get some card advantage, so I'm pretty interested to see how this plays out. I could be wrong, but I feel like it's worth playing in here. And then we've got just one Planeswalker in here, Dak Faden. Playing it mainly for the -2, gain control of target artifact, so gain control of target Soul Ring, for 3 mana. Dak Faden, as has been proven in the past, is a very powerful Planeswalker, so yeah, I'm going to play him in this deck. So there are only 2 utility lands in the deck because it's a 3-color deck, which is not playing green, so I want to do my best to not kind of mess around with the mana base and get color screwed too much. But we're playing 2 of the channel lands from Kamigawa, both Otawara and Aiganjo. Both very good. I'm not playing the red one though, because I could just swap out a mountain for it and it would probably be fine. But I feel like in this deck, making 2 1/1 tokens is really not so relevant. Like, the card is fine, but I feel like its ability is going to be the most useful in a deck that can take advantage of creating tokens, or a deck that wants to make a whole bunch of little creatures or something. I just question how useful that ability would be in this deck. And right now I'm just playing a basic mountain over it. Maybe I'll swap it out in the future, but at the moment it's just these 2 of the channel lands. And then the rest here is just a bunch of dual lands and some basics. I believe there are 37 lands in the deck. I didn't want to cut too many lands, so I feel like I have a pretty standard land count, maybe even a little bit on the high end, but I'm a fan of erring on the side of caution, having too many lands as opposed to having too few. So a bunch of dual lands here, some of the red-white ones, the red-blue ones, and the blue-white ones, and then some lands which can get me any color: Command Tower, Triome, Mana Confluence, Path of Ancestry. Some fetch lands, I count these as ones that can get me any color, so Arid Mesa and Flooded Strand, and also Scalding Tarn. Exotic Orchard, Fabled Passage, and then these super awesome looking basic lands. Definitely with the the Kamigawa commander, I'm going to play the Kamigawa lands, so I just got 3 mountain, 3 island, and 3 plains. So that's it for this deck. Like I said, I think this is a really cool deck. It's pretty unique, I think. Like, I don't think anything quite like this ability has been printed on a commander before. There might be something similar to it, but not super close to this. So this commander allows you to play cards that normally you probably wouldn't play. Like, Distorting Wake, it's fine on its own right, but there are much better cards that you would play in other commander decks. Like, typically you would just play a Cyclonic Rift over this, right? But with Hinata, you want to have both of these, because being able to discount the X makes this really playable, right? So I like this card because there's a lot of cards that work really well in this deck that don't work well at all in other decks. So it makes it pretty unique in that regard, I feel. So I'm looking forward to playing this deck some more. I feel like right now, I feel like this could potentially become one of my main decks to play. Like it has been a lot of fun to play so far, and I feel like it won't end up playing the same every game. So that could make things a lot more fun than just winning the same way each time. But let me know what you think. I mean, do you play Hinata, or have you thought about playing Hinata? I'd be interested to hear what kind of additions you might suggest, or if there's some cards that I'm playing that maybe you think I shouldn't be playing. Definitely would be interested to read all the comments. But if you're still watching though, thanks for watching. It'd be cool if you can like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. And if you'd like to support the channel, it's possible to do that through Patreon or by joining the channel on YouTube. And I'd just like to take a moment to thank all the viewers who have signed up on Patreon. And I do also have an affiliate link for cardtrader.com. If you're interested in possibly purchasing any of these cards, you can find that link in the video description below. And if you follow the link, it'll help out the channel a little bit. But otherwise though, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.